pandemic affecting the real estate investor and commercial real estate in general today?
What were the issues, if any, pre-pandemic?
It's a great question. There was. Right before the pandemic, which we'll say is the pre-pandemic period, there was a large amount of housing, multifamily, maybe mostly stabilized, that was mixed with free market rent in the city, all over the city. And what the investors were doing at the time that were in that space, they were buying these buildings. They could have been 100 units or 200 units. They could have had 80 stabilized and 20 free market. They overpaid a little bit because they knew what they were going to do with the property. They were taking these properties. They were hiring legal attorneys that would go through the buildings and make sure that people were there illegally. The ones that weren't, they would get rid of them. They would make those free market apartments. And then they would go through the building and maybe offer people money to leave. Maybe it would take a few years, but the bottom line at the end result was they raised the net operating income of the building. And in this sense, the building became much more valuable. So maybe 4 or 5 years later, they would either refinance and make a lot of money, take a lot of money off the top, or sell the building, in which case it was a great business for the people that were doing this. And there was a lot of them doing that. All of this ended. I mean, it just stopped on a dime, right? The government just stopped it. And now you cannot do free market space in those buildings. So immediately you had buildings that they were worth 50 million or 100 million, took a 30 or 40% decline overnight, shattering the industry for the people that were in that market.
So what were the hardest hit industries during the pandemic in New York?
So, being that we're still in the pandemic, the hotels, imagine the hotels, people not coming into New York, where millions and millions of people came, not staying at hotels. And now the governor and also the mayor, they arranged homeless people to stay in some of the hotels, like on the West Side, homeless, drug abusers, a little bit of insanity that's going on. And then the guys at the regular hotels without the income are suffering tremendously. Besides that, how about the people in the restaurant business? They're predicting, it's like 25,000 restaurants, and 75% of them may not be in business if this goes on in the next 6 or 8 months. I mean, how can they possibly manage? Now they have 25%, they're going to allow them to have 25% seating, and 75% won't exist, and now we're hitting the winter, and they won't be able to sit outside. So this is a disaster. And then on top of that, of course, retail in general, and the likes of Amazon and a lot of things that have hurt brick and mortar in general. So the combination of all this has had a tremendous effect on the industry. And on top of everything else, most of the rents in the city have severely come down. Take Madison Avenue. I've heard that $2,000 a month rents are down to $700. I mean, it's so what does a guy do that has these buildings that he has mortgages on, that he owes the bank mortgages and real estate taxes? What does he do now? So it's been tremendous.
So what was the government's role?
Well, they haven't been very helpful. And on top of everything, one of the biggest things they did, they put a moratorium on evictions. So now you cannot evict the people, they're not paying the rent, and because the political system is not working, they can't even get the PPP and the things that they were promising the people. How are people supposed to survive? And if they can't survive and pay the rent, how's the landlord supposed to make a deal with the banks or stay in business if there's 65 or 70% on the loan to value on the properties? It's significant.
What's happening to the major investors and landlords in the city right now?
They're hurting. They're really hurting. Of course, the guys that were smart or very big, that had LTVs of 25 to 50%, played a little more on the safe side. They weren't looking necessarily to build generational wealth in that manner. They watched the debt, which was really important. I would say more didn't. It's more typical that these guys, to build wealth, leverage up, and then when they appreciate, they refinance, and then they go to the next deal, and on and on and on it goes, feeling that they're going to build all this wealth, which they have. Who would believe that something like a pandemic would step in and all of a sudden rents would stop being paid fully? This is something that we've never seen.
What effect did CMBS have on real estate?
So that's a great question. So CMBS, and everybody knows what that is, but it's commercial mortgage-backed securities, where they basically have investors involved. That's done through the banking system, but it's no longer onto the bank, only the servicer's in charge. So why did people do this? They brought these loans in because they were non-recourse, which means something happens, they don't have to worry about it being, having their PG on it. They thought that was safe, but nobody knew about something like a hotel. Imagine you had a hotel, a $200 million hotel they built a couple of years ago. You have no income, of course you have no PG, but there's no bank to go to negotiate a deal or a deferral. And now you're sitting, and eventually if things aren't done, they'll go into default and they're going to lose the property. That's the worry.
What were the initial problems that the banks were facing?
The initial problem the banks were facing is that when the pandemic started, they were overwhelmed by PPP, CARES. The government got them involved because who would be better to do these deals than the banks? So they paid the bank a commission, let's say 1%, whatever it was. Of course, the banks took advantage a little bit because they didn't do 1% immediately on the guy that needed $100,000. They took the guy that needed $20 million. They did the biggest guys first because they made the most commissions, but they became overwhelmed with the PPP and the CARES Act, and that also hurt the regular business because they couldn't even pay attention to do business, and overwhelmed is the word. My personal opinion on all this is that New York is probably one of the best cities we've ever seen in the entire world, and we'll get through it. You may need help from some really intense guys that do consulting with the banks that really have an idea how to help you through the process. But I think that we'll get there. It's going to take a while though. And I've done a number of videos here, and I think if you stay tuned, you're going to be excited and you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to figure out at the end some really good solutions that are going to be able to help you. If you stay tuned and listen to the next videos, I have a number of solutions to offer. I think it's important. So if you're interested, stay tuned.